Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cult of Football podcast. Today, I just want to talk about Manchester City and Pep Guardiola. Now, I watched the Manchester derby that happened just a few days ago, and Manchester City were great overall. They managed to win the game 4-1, and they were fantastic in a lot of areas. And anybody that knows me and follows the channel and has followed me for a while knows that I've done a bit of analysis on Pep before. I've vested interest in seeing him do well because he's one of the few managers that I do really like and appreciate the kind of football they play. It's not just down to the style of football. Obviously, I do like Diego Simeone, I like other managers as well. It's not just about the style of football that he plays. I just happen to really like what he does, especially with the half spaces and how he sets his team up and attacks those areas, and lots of other stuff with his positional play as well. But he's just somebody that I analysed early on in my coaching career, and I think whenever you analyse a coach, you always feel like a gravitation towards them and seeing what they do and wanting them to do well as well. So as somebody who's followed the team quite a lot over the last few years, something that I've always noticed with Pep City, especially in the last 2 years, I would say, is Manchester City are not a very good team at coming from behind in matches. And the reason that's not, I think, talked about more is because it happens so rarely that it doesn't really seem to matter. So this season, if you think back to the Arsenal game at the Emirates, Manchester City went behind in that game and they were very fortunate to come back and win. I think a lot of City fans after the game were the first ones to say, we got away with one there. And that was with the red card to the stupid challenge on Jesus in the middle of the pitch, and then the Rodri goal in the last second. There were just so many things that just went City's way. It wasn't they did anything wrong, but it felt like it was another one of those games where, although they managed to come back and win, it was relying on the opposition to really undo themselves more than anything else. And this season in particular, like after that game they played Brentford, Manchester City haven't played really well for a long time. The last time they played well, apart from in the Manchester derby, was probably before even the Arsenal-Brentford game around that early part in January. So you're talking quite a few games they've gone, but they've managed to keep winning, and that is a sign of champions, I suppose. But they've not looked right for a while, and their ability to break teams down. The first thing that people go straight to with City is that defensively, they're not a good team defensively. Their records defensively under Pep have actually been pretty good. Now, that is because they keep the ball a lot of the game, but it isn't the defending that's the issue with City, or even stopping the counter-attacks. They've still been pretty good at that. But coming back from behind and creating clear-cut opportunities seem to be a part of the issue. Like a lot of games when City win, their expected goals is quite low for a team. When you think of Pep teams in your head, most people would think of creative football, lots of chances created, lots of possession, lots of passes, etc. If you go and look at the expected goals in some of their games, and it's relatively low. So I'm just looking here. Now, all of the stats I'm about to provide you are from Instat, so I'm not making them up as I go along. I'm also not getting them from some grab bag place on Twitter. Look at the expected goals then. I'm going to skip the most recent games because they've had quite a few cup games recently, and they did have a couple of outlier games like Sporting CP and Norwich, where they did smash a couple of teams. So let's go and look at... I'm going to pick the Chelsea game, because that was the last time they played against the big side from that little run of form where I thought they were terrible. I thought they were really bad against Leicester and got away with it. Remember, they were really far ahead in that game and Leicester nearly came back. They were terrible against Brentford and won 1-0. And then they absolutely got away with one against Arsenal. So let's look at these expected goals here in this little period. So they played Southampton away from home. They had expected goals of 1.69 versus Southampton's 1.49. The score was 1-1. And that is, again, in that margin for error sort of game that City playing a lot. There's a lot of games that they win 1-0 and 2-1 where expected goals is fairly close. They don't create that many absolute clear-cut opportunities, but because they score first, they stay ahead of the game. They demoralise the opposition. They're incredibly good at controlling the game. Manchester City must be the best team in the world from controlling the game from the front, but when they're behind, it's a real issue. In that game, that's another example. They went 1-0 down to Southampton in this close game. They managed to get a goal back to draw, but obviously that draw is not the result that City were looking for. So that's a plus, obviously, for Southampton in that circumstance, not Manchester City. They played Chelsea the game before. Manchester City's expected goals was 0.74 to Chelsea's 0.48. They won the game 1-0. They scored first. They stayed ahead. They controlled the game, as they did. They then played Arsenal the last league game before that, away from home at the Emirates, in that famous game where everything went their way in the end, although it wasn't for a while. Arsenal did score first, and this is a rare game where it took a red card and some ridiculous things to go in City's favour for them to come back and win. So they did come back and win. City's expected goals was 2, completely nailed on, perfect 2. And Arsenal's was 0.69. Brentford away, City won 1-0, scored the first goal, controlled the game. They did struggle. I felt, watching this game, I thought Manchester City were playing really badly. The commentators didn't seem to pick up on it too much at the time. And this was a Brentford team that was about to go on a terrible run of form themselves. Manchester City had a 1.02 expected goals. Brentford was 0.45. Now, this isn't the only metric to look at. I'm just using this as an example of what I'm talking about. This isn't the only thing I would look at. I'm just using this to go along with what I'm saying. Like even shots on target, City had 4 against Brentford versus Brentford's 2. Like it's not that isn't the only thing. That's just what I'm saying here as an example. And then against Leicester, that game was chaotic. They went way in front, they stayed in front, and it was just back and forth. But yeah, I just use that as an example of what we've seen in terms of Manchester City and their expected goals. It's just a good guide to what happens in these close games. And these close games that they have a lot of, where the game drifts a little bit, as long as they score first, that game does not matter. They win. If they don't score first, they often fall into trouble. Now, I'm going to show you a table here. Now, this table is points after going behind. Now, Manchester City are a bit of an outlier because they've only gone behind 6 times this season. There are a couple of teams similar. Chelsea, Liverpool, and Arsenal are all in single digits as well. Liverpool are much higher on the list. Obviously, Arsenal are actually worse, which is interesting considering they have Arteta, Pep's old assistant, as their manager. Manchester City have gone behind 6 times this season. They've gone on to win once, Arsenal. They've drawn twice, and they've lost 3 times. And again, that goes back to my point. I did not know this before I started recording this video. I just knew it because I'd seen it a few times this season. I'd noticed it myself. This isn't like I found an interesting statistic, so let's go make a video on it. I already felt like this, analysed this myself, and I happened to have been correct, at least with what I'd felt like when I was watching City. But that is the stat that backs it up. Right, this is according to transfermarket.co.uk. They have an exact table for this, which is really good of them to have that. Yeah, so City with 1 win. The only teams that have got less than 1 are Crystal Palace, Leeds and Burnley, who could all go down this season. In this table anyway, the team that's the best coming from behind is West Ham. They've come back and won 4 times out of 14 deficits. Liverpool are the closest, let's say, single-digit team. They have gone behind 7 times. They've won twice, drawn 3 and lost 2 with a total of 9 points. And as we said, in Arsenal are the worst, 9 times, won 1 and 7. So they've won 1, drawn 1, lost 7 in there 9 times. And Manchester City are 14th. So Manchester City are the 14th best team in the Premier League for going behind and winning games. That is on total number of points, though. And I guess, if you've had more attempts coming from behind, you're going to be higher. So it's not always necessarily good to be at the top completely. I wish there was like an average that they did here, but it's just done on raw points. If you go behind once all season and you win it, you're only going to have 3 points on the table. But it is interesting to see that that's where Manchester City are at. Liverpool have 4 more points than them coming from behind. And I've said this for a while, actually. If I had to go in a title race against somebody, I would not want to go against Manchester City, ideally, in a title race. But in a one-off game, in a Champions League final, if I had to pick to play against Manchester City or Liverpool, I'd rather play against City than Liverpool. Because if you score first against City, I feel like you've got a real chance, as the Champions League final showed against Chelsea. But against Liverpool, you always feel like they've got a chance. Like that game against Liverpool against Leicester, that happened a few weeks ago. People were just hounding Liverpool for playing badly, and I was watching the game thinking Liverpool played pretty well here. And say, let's have a look at the expected goals on that and some of the stats, because I felt like they played actually really well, and it just felt like that eventually they were going to score. They just looked so dangerous, the way that Manchester City do not look when they're up behind in games, in my opinion. Not always, but of course it's not every single game. There are games where they're going to come back and do well, but generally speaking, let's go and find it here. Liverpool versus Leicester. It was away from home. Okay, so let's have a look at shots 20-6. Shots on target, 4 to Liverpool, 3 to Leicester. Expected goals, 0.71 for Leicester, 3.2 for Liverpool. Everything is in their favour. 12 corners. I mean, I can go into more. There are loads more stats I can go through, but let's not go through every single one. But pretty much, yeah, there you go. Again, it sort of just showed that Liverpool actually played pretty well in that game and created a lot of chances and looked really threatening trying to chase the game. And they were quite unlucky, I felt, not to score. But they got hounded as playing badly, and I didn't understand why. I think if a team somewhere in the league, I think a lot of pundits and fans in the UK in particular seem to then create a narrative in their head that fits that when they watch something, and rather than analysing actually what they're seeing. There's lots of times where I've said things this season that have come true and I just haven't said it publicly. I've not done something like this, and I almost wish I had have done. Problem is, for what's going to happen now. I'm going to say things publicly now, and then it's not going to happen, which is just the way things go. Yeah, that's why I feel like I wanted to make this a discussion about Manchester City and almost raise awareness that they're an absolutely brilliant team. And I still think that Manchester City are probably, the last 5 years, one of the best club teams ever. And they need a Champions League to go along with it for that to be cemented. I think that's probably true. They have to, really. But they really are that good. They've just been a bit unfortunate, and this has been one of their issues when they go behind. So in a Champions League two-legged affair, if you go a couple of goals down to somebody, City are really going to find it tough to come back. 1 goal is okay, but 2 is always a problem. Whereas I always feel like Liverpool, a couple of goals down, could flip it. So it's going to be really important for City to control the Champions League games. And I always feel like that if somebody else can knock out Liverpool for them, and as I'm recording this right now, Liverpool are in their second leg against Inter, which I expect them to get through. But as long as they get through that, I think that Liverpool needs to be knocked out by somebody else for City to win it, which is what happened last year, which is why last year was such an important time for City to win it. They missed a real trick with that, and I know a lot of people may feel like they'll always have a chance every year, but that was a real chance for them, and they've got to now beat Liverpool to win it. I would have thought at some point now, which is going to be very, very tough. One thing with City as well, I think I'm going to do a bit more analysis on them. I was watching the Manchester derby after the fact. What was really interesting is looking back at it is just how much Bernardo Silva, up to the first goal, if you go back and watch the first 5 minutes up until the first goal that goes in, you would think that if you didn't know the team and just looked at the players where they were, you would have thought that Bernardo Silva was a second pivot next to Rodri. He was so deep and in line with him so often, even when they were building and when they were supporting the attack, you'd have thought it was like a double pivot with Foden up front and De Bruyne playing like a 10 offset a little bit to the right, maybe playing almost like a front two. And they still break the back four the same way, I think, than I broken down previously, but it's completely different in some of the other ways, and the way that they created attacks and scored that left-hand side was fantastic. And it's just really interesting to see how often they went with like a double pivot build-up almost, especially with Bernardo Silva and Rodri, and how, if you actually look at Cancelo, despite the fact he's right-footed playing on the left, he wasn't really an inverted wing-back at all. He's actually like an orthodox wing-back that's quite wide, actually, which is necessary for Bernardo Silva, Foden and Grealish to all be in those half spaces. I can't remember what zone. I have to look at the zone numbers again, but all those zones that are set off to the left of the centre, in all those zones there, they were just occupied by those three players, and he had to be out the way, because otherwise he was going to be an extra body that just brought more pressure and attention to the area, which wasn't required. It was quite interesting to see all of that come out, and how people always think of him as an inverted wing back playing on the left, but he definitely wasn't. He was quite wide for a lot of it. That's definitely something I'm going to go back and look at and probably do a bit of analysis on them again. I'd like to in this format, in like a talking format on YouTube, but I can't use video clips because of copyright. So I'm going to have to try and be creative about how that goes. But I just thought I would share some thoughts about Manchester City this weekend in particular, and some thoughts about the statistics on them and Liverpool coming from behind. And yeah, generally, from my point of view, if you had to play one team in a final, I'd rather play City, because if you can score first, you've got obviously a very good chance. The problem is getting that first goal, because it doesn't happen very often, 6 times all season. But Liverpool don't go behind that often either, according to that. You know, they've gone from a losing position anyway. There's probably times where they've scored first, conceded, looked on the ropes, and then gone and got the winners and stuff. But if any of those stats are wrong, that is not my fault. That is the transfer market. That's probably, I think it's correct. They seem pretty reputable, so I think that'd be fine. And this is from a point of view, you know, I'd love to see this team, win a Champions League, because I think that for an English team to dominate as well as they have, and don't get me wrong, Liverpool's team is also fantastic. To have two teams like this is what we looked at as English football fans in the late 2000s and 2010, 2011. We looked at Barcelona, Real Madrid, Guardiola, Mourinho, or whoever the manager was at the time, as the two like absolute top wonder clubs in the world. And now we have them both in England. We have the two top teams with two of the best managers in the world playing at an incredibly high level, pushing each other, and they're English teams. So it's nice to see that we could potentially have multiple Champions League winners in a row from England. We've done so well in Europe. People don't realise how well we've done in Europe as a country the last few years. Even internationally as well. We've done semi-final World Cup and the European Championships final. But it's going to be really important for Pep to find a way, I think, to consistently create those clicker opportunities, especially when you're behind. Like watching them against Tottenham, I always felt like they were never really going to create that final chance. It never really looked like they were creating much when they lost 3-2. And they finally got that penalty to score and go 2-2, and then end up losing anyway. So there's something not quite right with them generally, especially playing from behind. And without going into too much depth now, because this video is going to take a lot of time, but there's a lot of areas I think of it becomes a bit of a problem. I feel like that when they play this striker that moves horizontally across the pitch, and one of the central fielders goes and plays like a second striker almost, when they're making all those combinations and movements, sometimes it can be a little bit toothless in the incisive runs that go in behind, with the wingers playing like a Mahrez, somebody who's going to get the ball to feet and drive with the ball rather than run in behind. When you lack a Sané and Sterling on the pitch, they just look like they're going to be a bit toothless at times and really struggle to break teams down that are sat in there. And it's proven to be the case, I think, a lot this season. They've actually dropped points a fair few times, so has everybody else. So it's not been as bad. It's not been as bad as last year, though. City aren't perfect. They're not a perfect team. I really do admire the football they play and the way that they play. But they're definitely a flawed team. So the game at the Etihad for the Premier League is very interesting. Liverpool go 1-0 up from a set piece, like a Virgil van Dijk set piece kind of thing. And City need to win the game because they're behind in the title race. City are in a big bit of trouble. If City just need to draw, they'll probably be okay, I think. I think City don't want to go into that game needing to win, because it only takes one slip up, one mistake. But we've said this before a few times. They were in a crucial game at the Etihad a few years ago, where Liverpool was starting to get ahead in the title race. It was the year that that Liverpool nearly won it before COVID, and it was a crucial game. City were playing in a similar way, actually. They were struggling to win from behind again back then. I don't have the stats for that. And City went 1-0 up and ended up winning the game when Aguero scored that great near post goal. So that's, I'm not sure what the final score was. I think it was 2-0. But yeah, those kind of games are so crucial, and City have to score the first goal. So it's just something to look out for from now on. When you see City go behind, look at the type of chances they create, look what happens, and hopefully for their sake they don't go behind again too often. But it's definitely an issue. They need to find a solution. It's not about buying a striker. It's about having a player that can make the correct movements at the right times and stay in the positions that Pep wants and create the overloads at the right times, which, for whatever reason, when they go behind in games, they don't seem to do very well. Like against Tottenham, go back and watch that game. I've never seen such a poor Pep team at trying to break somebody down, and got very fortunate to get the goal anyway. Then they conceded the Harry Kane goal late, which threw it all away. So yeah, that's gonna do this episode. It's just really an episode on Manchester City, the state of where they're currently at, and their title running against Liverpool, and their inevitable clash with Liverpool in the Champions League. I think City and Liverpool would both beat everybody else except for each other. So I think Liverpool are the only team that can beat City. I think City are probably the only team that can beat Liverpool. But you never know. That's just generally speaking. Football is not played on paper. Football is not played on this is what should happen, because anything can happen in football. So it could be anything. But that's in reality where I see within the margin of error, that's what's it's going to take for each other to get knocked out. I think we'll review this in a few weeks and see how things are going with the two teams. Maybe we'll do a bit more of a deep dive on the two teams and their stats and how they're looking. Liverpool's purchase of Luis Diaz is a brilliant signing and looks to put them slightly further ahead, gives them a much better chance, whereas City have sat on what they've got. They've got a lot of players in that sort of number 10 and wide areas anyway. Jesus is the only striker who I'm not a massive fan of, so he's a good player, he's a good striker, he's just not the number 9 that's going to take them to the Premier League and Champions League every year. So it'd be interesting to see where they go into the summer. But for now, with what they've got, they need to hope they don't get too many injuries going into the little run in here. But yeah, I'm definitely going to look to do a piece on a manager at some point, like a more in-depth piece on the stats of the manager and that kind of stuff. We could do Pep, we could do Klopp. I think probably somebody like Simeone would be good. But we will definitely come back and revisit this in a few weeks, I think. And I'm hoping to get another one out of these soon. Originally, I started this because I didn't think I was going to be able to do manager content anymore. But even though I'm able to do it again, I'd like to still do something football related and keep it going. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting enough to watch. We'll come back and revisit this anyway. I don't know if that'll be the next one. There might be something in between. But at the very least, we'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll see how these teams are lining up again and see if City go behind and see what happens. And if they do come from behind and win, look at what they did differently this time and how they got their goals. That's something that we're definitely going to go and look at if they go behind. But I don't know if they will go behind that often. But that's going to do it. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.